One of the most persistent debates within the Bleach community is the question of which Espada was the strongest. Over the years, numerous arguments have been made for various characters, and the situation has only been made murkier thanks to the constant changing of what the Espada's ranking system actually means, taking it from a once very straightforward power ranking to something a little more abstract and character-driven. But regardless of the changes made, the story always revolves around the same few characters: Stark, Barragan, Ulquiorra, and yeah, even Yami, with a compelling argument to be made really for any of them to take the top spot. As always with these discussions though, the reality is often deeper than it first appears. What exactly does it mean to be the strongest in this sense in a series like Bleach? Is it the character with the most broken, seemingly unbeatable ability? The character who is physically the strongest? Or the one the fewest people could defeat in a straight fight? But then, maybe the answer to that last question is also the answer to the previous two questions, or to none of them at all. There are so many different variables and avenues to consider, and this is something I've been thinking about recently, hence this somewhat loose and rambling video. Specifically, I've been thinking about it in relation to Ulquiorra, who I think is, by many, considered to be the strongest Espada. Although it's never confirmed nor stated outright, there are definitely valid reasons for thinking so. And so, in today's video, I wanted to take a look at Ulquiorra's mysterious Segunda Etapa, the one variable completely unique to this character that often tips him over the edge in said discussions. Yet, I also want to focus in on the major problem this form has when it comes to determining just how strong it really is, and Ulquiorra in general, and how this affects figuring out the truth. So, without further ado, let's dive in. And yeah, this video is going to be more of a sort of casual stream of consciousness, a rambling video so to speak, so I apologise in advance for the lack of any real structure or anything like that. But hey, if you like this sort of thing, if you like this video, consider hitting subscribe down below, as it really does make all the difference and it would be greatly appreciated. Narratively, Ulquiorra is positioned as the top Espada, so even though he's only technically the fourth, his relationship to Ichigo and his prominence within the story as essentially the arc's main villain until Aizen steps up personally is definitely sound reason to believe that he may in fact be the strongest of the bunch, even if it's never outwardly said. Showing and not telling is an absolutely vital storytelling device. But of course, the main reason people have for believing Ulquiorra to be the strongest Espada is his Segunda Etapa, his completely unique second phase, an evolution of the Resurrección to become something unlike anything we've ever seen. While Resurrección is often compared to a Shinigami's bankai, at least in terms of the power increase it gives the user, Ulquiorra's transformations adhere much more closely to the standard Shinigami scale, with his first release form feeling like a Shikai when compared next to his genuinely terrifying and apparently extraordinarily rare Segunda Etapa, which would be the actual Bankai in this scenario. But what do we actually know about the Segunda Etapa? Truthfully, nothing at all. We have no idea how Ulquiorra came to obtain it, and we can only speculate on what kind of a power increase it actually gives someone. We know, thanks to a club outside answer, that Grimmjow could attain Segunda Etapa if he trained hard enough, but again, what that really entails, it kind of seems like we'll never know. It's also just interesting to me that Ulquiorra specifically has unlocked this form, because I wonder what his personal drive was to do so. Ulquiorra doesn't strike me as the kind of character to chase power, to feel a need to prove himself to his contemporaries, to his peers, or to his enemies, nor even really to have ambition to become stronger at all. As a personification of emptiness, the void, and nihilism, to be honest, it almost feels a little antithetical to Ulquiorra's worldview to actively strive for greater heights. So, did he unlock Segunda Etapa naturally, as part of the day-to-day strife and suffering he endured in his days pre-Arrancarization, perhaps? There's also the question of what Segunda Etapa really is. Bankai makes sense for a Shinigami, thanks to the way Zanpakuto work. It's the final stage of release for a Zanpakuto, unlocked only by those at the height of their training, their power, and their understanding, after many years of work. Or 3 days if you're Kisuke and Ichigo. But Arrancar Zanpakuto fundamentally do not work like that. There's no relationship to be had with that power, at least not in the same way. Essentially, an Arrancar Zanpakuto is just a means of sealing their true power and their true hollow form, effectively merging the human bodies they achieved through becoming Arrancar with their latent hollow power that's always existed. A Segunda Etapa, therefore, by nature, must be a product of Arrancarization, as it's releasing, apparently, even more of that stored away power, though where that's come from we don't know. Unless Ulquiorra built upon the foundation of his original release, of his original true hollow power. But if that's so, wouldn't that have materially changed the shape of his power forever? To the point where I'm surprised he can even manifest his first release at all anymore. There's a fascinating quote from Uryu in chapter 348, and it may be the single most important piece of dialogue to this entire discussion, where he describes feeling the spirit energy of Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa for the first time, where he says, and I quote, "What is this? Is it spirit energy? It's so different, it's not like any spirit energy I felt. It's not just that it's powerful or massive, it's alien. It's so thick and heavy that it almost feels like something other than spirit energy. It feels like there's an ocean above the sky." How intriguing. I don't think this quote is given enough thought by people, but what does it mean? As a Quincy, Uryu is very well versed in understanding and identifying spirit energy. But he can't recognize this. He doesn't recognize this, to the point where he considers it to be alien, which means it must come, it must fall, it must feel outside the norm, outside of all spirit energy he's ever felt from the individual spirit races. That means whatever power Ulquiorra is giving off, it doesn't feel like that of a hollow anymore. But at the same time, Uryu and Orihime can still feel his power in a material, tangible sense, so he hasn't transcended. Which makes perfect sense, as he should still be just a hollow. He isn't a mixture of two different races, at least as far as we know. Could it be that the Segunda Etapa exists then as the purest form of Ulquiorra's aspect of death? Though that seems unlikely too, since he notes that this is true despair. But despair isn't his aspect, it seemingly has nothing to do with who he is, if we were to take his words literally at least. So then, it's as if Ulquiorra has unlocked something beyond the power of a hollow, but hollow all the same. As if he has become the purest form of a hollow, of what it means to be a hollow. It's honestly one of the most interesting parts of this entire reveal, and I can't help but wish we'd learned just a bit more. Obviously, the main theme of Ichigo versus Ulquiorra is the two combatants tilting to the extremes of one another. In this fight, Ichigo becomes more hollow than ever before, straying further and further away from his humanity as he reaches the dark core of this battle that is emblematic of everything sinister and evil that he finds waiting for him at the center of his journey to Hollowdom, the point of no return. Meanwhile, and this transformation is slightly less overt, but Ulquiorra's limits as a Hollow are tested, as he finds himself inadvertently falling more and more into humanity, into becoming more human than ever before, culminating in him understanding what it means to have a heart that connects to people. Something that's not physical, that's not tangible, that's not real, but it is real emotionally. At last he finally understands that. But what if the activation of the Segunda Etapa is Ulquiorra's last-ditch effort to stave off that humanity, and so in doing so, he becomes more hollow than ever before, the absolute apex, the pinnacle of what it means to be a hollow. Maybe that explains why this form is more animalistic than even his resurrection. He is closest now to what he once was, more so than ever before. That's all conjecture on my part. It's all just thoughts coming into my head. Right now, it kind of feels like Kubo just wasn't happy with his design for Ulquiorra's initial release, and so came up with a reason to realistically have the design changed to be something that he preferred. I have to say, the Segunda Etapa, it simply looks way cooler, there's no doubt about it. But we're not here to discuss how it looks. Instead, going back to the question of how powerful Ulquiorra is as a result, well, that's where the real problem comes in. Trying to determine that feels almost impossible to me, thanks to the nature of the context of this form's existence in the manga. Usually when wading into these discussions, I try to use the context of the manga and what we see unfolding on the page to best inform my points. Ultimately, it is always going to be subjective. It's always going to be speculative. Unless it is definitively, explicitly stated in the manga, only Kubo knows these answers for sure. Looking briefly at what Ulquiorra himself notes about this form, he mentions that he is the only Arrancar who has obtained it. But I wonder how he actually knows that. He also says that Aizen has never seen this form before, and if we're to believe that Aizen doesn't know about it, though I've never quite bought that, this is Aizen after all, then what's to say other incredibly powerful Arrancar haven't been able to do the same and hide it just as well? If Aizen doesn't know about this form, then it stands to reason the other Arrancar don't either, but what's to say that couldn't work both ways? I mean, on a meta level, clearly he's right, since none of the other Espada used one, but still I wonder how he knew that. Interestingly though, it used to be that Aizen supposedly not knowing about the Segunda Etapa was a big argument, a big reason for why Ulquiorra could still be the strongest Espada despite only being ranked 4th. It's that Aizen wasn't aware of his true potential when giving him that number. But these days, does that still hold true? With the way the meaning behind the numbers has changed so much, so dramatically, I'm not sure Aizen not knowing really holds any weight anymore. Anyway, moving on to the central problem with this form that we kind of started talking about and trying to determine its strength. You see, the problem with the Segunda Etapa lies within the context of its use. There was no reason for it. There was no reason for it to be used outside of to prove a point. In chapters 346 and 347, we see Ulquiorra comfortably, and I mean comfortably, overwhelming Ichigo with just his initial release. In fact, Ulquiorra's Resurrection Murcielago is somehow so significantly stronger than Ichigo, even when using both Bankai and his Hollowification, that Ichigo can't even land a scratch on the Espada. He can barely begin to fight back. He's only able to fight back when Ulquiorra allows it, and essentially goads him into doing so. Honestly, the difference is shocking. Considering Ichigo was bearing down upon base Ulquiorra, and even overwhelming him to the point of cracking his blade, Ulquiorra releasing his Zanpakuto instigates maybe one of the biggest power jumps we see of any Espada. No, it almost certainly is the biggest power jump. You know, you only have to look at other examples to kind of see how different a scenario this is. Byakuya versus Zamari is fairly even before Zamari releases his Zanpakuto. Byakuya has maybe got the upper hand, but Zamari isn't hit. Neither of them take a hit. In this instance, it would be like that, but then when Zamari activates Brujeria, he completely destroys Byakuya to the point where there's no kind of coming back from it. And the same would be true of a different Ichigo fight, say against Grimjo, where they are again fairly even, and actually this is very apt, because it's a similar situation in that Ichigo is using Bankai and Hollow Mask prior to Grimjo activating his Resurrection. They're kind of even, but imagine if after Grimjo released Pantera, that he just totally destroyed that form of Ichigo. That's what this is like. Ichigo simply cannot keep up, to the point where Ulquiorra almost instantly decapitates him as soon as he transforms, and we just kind of go from there. So this is already an issue, because Ulquiorra is somehow so far above Ichigo at his current, strongest level. We're already struggling to find a comparison point, and we haven't even got to the Segunda Etapa yet. It's not like the two of them continue to fight on somewhat even ground after Ulquiorra releases his Zanpakuto, only for Ichigo to at last get the upper hand after a terrible struggle, after a well-fought fight, forcing Ulquiorra to reveal his secret second form that then overwhelms Ichigo with no question. No, Ulquiorra is handily smacking Ichigo around already. The difference between the two of them is so great, the gulf is so wide, that Ulquiorra is even getting a bit cocky, casually ordering Ichigo to fire a Getsuga at him, just so he can prove how much stronger he's become. And after Ichigo obliges and launches a Getsuga with his mask active, Ulquiorra simply lets it wash over him essentially, like the tides breaking upon the rocks, with the attack doing no damage whatsoever. Interestingly, Ichigo is horrified by this. He's horrified to see that Ulquiorra is unharmed, which I find maybe a little odd. Ichigo's fully powered Getsuga barely did anything to the Espada in the past, so I'm not sure what he was expecting here. By the end of chapter 347, Ichigo is so wounded that he can barely stand up. Yet he remains defiant. It's this defiance that forces Ulquiorra to release his second form. This constant defiance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds that Ulquiorra cannot reason with. This is how Ichigo is defeating the Espada in this moment. Not physically, but through his human resolve and determination, presenting something before the Espada's all-seeing eyes that he can't understand. But today's video is a question of power. And so when Ulquiorra releases his Segunda Etapa, it is fair to say he didn't really need to. His initial release simply wasn't pushed to its limits. He's only revealing this form now in this moment because he wants to crush Ichigo's hope completely. He doesn't actually need to use it, and that's where the problem continues. There's no real barometer for how much stronger this form is than Ulquiorra's initial release, because he was kicking Ichigo around already. Yes, there's absolutely nothing Ichigo can do in the face of Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa, but there was nothing he could do in the face of Murcielago either. So we don't really have any reading on just how much more power this form gives Ulquiorra in this moment. Ulquiorra kills Ichigo, yes, but it's only after maybe half a chapter's worth of the Espada flinging Ichigo about the place, which again he was essentially doing anyway. I can't stress that enough. The moment where Ulquiorra starts to utterly dominate Ichigo, where he appears beside him and grabs his head, slamming him into a building, would have hit a lot harder and meant a lot more if Ichigo was managing to successfully keep up with and fight back against Ulquiorra's initial release right down to the wire. The change needed to be way more drastic, way more immediate. We know as readers that this form is stronger. We know that it's faster, that it's more effective, simply because as readers we know that's how these things work. We understand the rules and laws of the world of Bleach from a narrative perspective. This is a second form, it's a power-up. It's more powerful in every way, it has to be. But there isn't a clear gauge for the difference between them playing out in front of us. But then, the problem evolves. Only this time it's now going in the opposite direction. Once Zangetsu takes over Ichigo's body and begins to fight Ulquiorra in his stead, Zangetsu utterly dominates the Espada, to the point where Ulquiorra can barely do anything at all. He finds himself in Ichigo's shoes. In fact, Ulquiorra looks as helpless here as Ichigo did earlier in the fight, when Ulquiorra released his Zanpakuto for the first time. Now, Zangetsu is appearing right behind the Espada, overwhelming his Sero, catching his explosive lance in his bare hand, and just all round dominating the fight from start to finish. And so we have another issue. Zangetsu is now so much stronger than even Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa that again we have no barometer for how powerful he really is. Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa exists in the vacuum of the Saga of the Dome. But unfortunately, during that time he never once fights on even remotely even footing with any character. He's either completely destroying Ichigo or being completely destroyed by Zangetsu. There's no in-between. No sufficient gauge. And so, because of this immense disparity found on both sides, like I said, it is nigh impossible to accurately gauge just how powerful this form of Ulquiorra's really is. Is it considerably stronger than Ichigo in Bankai with his Hollow Mask active? Well, yeah, but so was Ulquiorra's first release. And is it considerably weaker than Zangetsu? Again, yeah, but considering this form of Zangetsu never fights anyone else ever again, we've got absolutely nothing to compare it to. Now, I actually think this is the curse of being the villain who gets to face the main character. It is never going to be normal. It's not like having a fight with a supporting character, where the rules are more clearly defined, who is firmly entrenched within the established hierarchy here, that's the Gote 13, which makes it certainly easier to look at how strong said character really is in that established situation. Is it likely that Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa is the most powerful form of any Espada? I mean, sure, but only because of the narrative implications of such a thing. This might be unpopular, but we don't see anything particularly impressive from the Segunda Etapa that the previous form wasn't already doing. Lanza del Relampago is obviously hugely destructive, and it looks pretty crazy, but that's all spectacle. That doesn't really have any bearing on anything. It doesn't hit anyone. Therefore, it can't realistically be used as a gauge. It's similar in a sense to Yami's gigantic Sero. It looks impressive on the surface, even getting a compliment from Kenpachi himself, but since it doesn't actually achieve anything against anyone, what can we really say about it other than, wow, that was cool? Ulquiorra's amazing healing properties, what he considers to be his defining trait, are just that. They are amazing. And he is able to restore enormous portions of his body, something that other Espada simply cannot do. But again, he was already doing that. literally plucking out and regrowing his own eye like it's nothing at the start of the arc. This isn't exclusive to his Segunda Etapa. I know it is difficult to do because of the way the story was set up at the time, but if Ulquiorra had come up against one or more of the captains in Hueco Mundo and casually defeated them like it was nothing, well then we'd actually have some kind of a gauge as to how powerful he really was in his Segunda Etapa form. Or if he fought against one of them and it was maybe slightly more even. The problem is that his enemy is Ichigo. And therefore, like I said, the rules go out the window. Another way we could have gauged it would be if Zangetsu, in that form, managed to fight anyone else, and we saw how he performed in that situation. Like, say, I don't know, this is literally just a thought out of nowhere, but say Zangetsu went up against Stark in his Resurrection, and their fight was a little more even, a little more balanced, say. Then yeah, we'd at least have some kind of a barometer. We would know that, okay, maybe Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa isn't quite as strong as Los Lobos. But that never happens, never comes close to happening, so we have no idea. And so that is the problem with Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa, and trying to determine just how powerful it really was. In a sense, it feels like it was the victim, not of an unreliable narrator per se, but of a circumstance that was never really suitable. The jump between Ulquiorra's first and second release doesn't feel enormous on the page, because he was already destroying Ichigo. I mean, seriously, go back and reread chapters 346 and 347, and you might be surprised at how much damage the Espada is doing and how easily. And in chapter 348, again, he only really fights Ichigo for half a chapter at best, and it's mostly just more of the same. Because Ichigo was already getting thrown around. Ichigo gets blitzed a couple of times, tossed about the place, but that was already happening. To the point where, like I said, he almost had his head cut off the moment Ulquiorra released his Zanpakuto Toe. There's no doubt that Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa is immensely powerful. No one's arguing that. But because he was already casually destroying Ichigo in his previous form, and is then destroyed by Zangetsu immediately afterwards, it exists in this weird power purgatory. How much stronger was it than his original release? We've no idea. How much weaker was it than Zangetsu? We've no idea, but it seems like a lot. Again, if the situation had been slightly different, and Ulquiorra had been given the chance to take on a captain and either utterly wash over them, or it was a little more even, that might have given us a much clearer idea. Just some outside context. Some context outside of Ichigo. Yes, Ulquiorra brutalizes Uryu, but no offense to Uryu, that's not all that impressive back here in the Arrancar arc. All it means is Segunda Etapa Ulquiorra is either stronger, more efficient, or both than Xyloporo, and well, no one was questioning that to begin with. So yeah, that's kind of it for this video and my rambling stream of consciousness, and I appreciate you indulging me because it doesn't really feel like we've got to the bottom of this, at the end of this thing, but it's just something I was thinking about recently in relation to all of the Espada, not just Ulquiorra, but Ulquiorra perhaps more so because the existence of this form is such an interesting outlier. Basically what I'm getting at is, even though Ulquiorra is the only Espada with a second form, it exists in such a narrative vacuum that I feel it doesn't really add much to the conversation about Ulquiorra's power. Because Ulquiorra was overwhelming Ichigo, does that automatically mean he would be able to defeat Stark or Barragan in their Resurrection? No, I don't think so. There's no way it's that black and white. Certainly not back here during this stage of the Arrancar arc. But we also just simply don't have enough information. Maybe the main point we should be looking at is that description of Ulquiorra's spirit energy that Uryu gives. That feels like the distinguishing factor of this second form, the fact that this power feels like nothing else. The fact that it may either go beyond that of a hollow, or be a new form of hollow power altogether, never previously seen. That's the key here. But just because it feels alien doesn't automatically mean it's more powerful, it may just be different. But again, circling back around, the simplest answer is often the right one. And with Ulquiorra's established position in the narrative, his rivalry with Ichigo, his status as really the boss of the Espada, even though that's not a literal position, it makes sense from a storytelling perspective that whatever this is, it would be the strongest, perhaps the purest form of hollow power. Maybe one day we'll learn more, but for now, again, I appreciate you sticking with it as I ramble my thoughts away in video form. But that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some value out of it. Maybe. It's always fun to do an old-fashioned discussion. Now, maybe I've missed something, or maybe I'm just completely wrong. I'd love to get your thoughts, your perspective down in the comments below. But this is why I think it's genuinely difficult, if not totally impossible, to really gauge Ulquiorra's power in his Segunda Etapa. The main problem with this form and trying to understand it, from a power perspective anyway. So yeah, do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Just how powerful is this form of Ulquiorra's? How does it stack up to not only the other Espada, but frankly the other power players in Bleach? I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below. It'd be great to see if I have missed something. I'd love to know, so do please let me know. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. We just released a new video over there, looking at all 27 night bosses in Elden Ring Night Rain. That was quite a fun one, so I'd love your input over there as well. Maybe give us a subscribe. It would mean the absolute world. And of course, a huge thank you, as we end every single video, to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So your support does mean absolutely everything. If you want to support me over there as well, you can do just that by visiting the link in the description. Alright everyone, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.